In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro presents a comprehensive analysis of the upcoming election, focusing on his reasons for voting for Donald Trump. He discusses various aspects of the political landscape, polling data, and the implications of the election results. Shapiro's arguments are structured around his personal journey as a voter, the contrasting candidates, and the broader implications for American society. Shapiro begins by emphasizing the significance of election night, highlighting the anticipation surrounding the counting of votes and the potential outcomes for the nation. He notes that the stakes are incredibly high, as the results will shape the future of America. The podcast sets the stage for a live election night event featuring prominent conservative voices, underscoring the importance of staying informed and engaged in the political process. Shapiro encourages listeners to prepare for a long night of results, reflecting on the historical context of elections and the weight of each vote. Shapiro delves into the current polling data, presenting a mixed picture of the electoral landscape. He cites the Real Clear Politics polling average, which shows Trump leading in several battleground states, while also acknowledging the close margins in others. Shapiro points out that many of these polls are within the margin of error, suggesting that the race could swing dramatically in either direction. He highlights the potential for polling errors, drawing parallels to the 2020 election, where Trump was underestimated by many pollsters. This uncertainty adds to the tension of the upcoming election, as both sides prepare for a potentially surprising outcome. The discussion shifts to early voting trends, with Shapiro noting that Republicans have improved their early voting strategies compared to 2020. He explains that while early voting can provide insights, it often reflects the preferences of high-propensity voters who may have already decided on their candidate. Shapiro cautions against over-interpreting early voting data, as it may not accurately predict the final outcome. He emphasizes the importance of getting out to vote, regardless of early voting trends, and shares his own experience of voting early for Trump. Shapiro articulates his reasons for supporting Donald Trump, focusing on three main pillars: Trump himself, Kamala Harris, and the institutions of America. He acknowledges the character concerns surrounding Trump, but argues that his policies and governance during his presidency were effective. Shapiro believes that Trump embodies a worldview that aligns with America's founding principles, contrasting this with Harris's approach, which he views as detrimental to the nation. He emphasizes that Trump's presidency was marked by economic growth, a strong foreign policy, and a commitment to meritocracy. In stark contrast to his support for Trump, Shapiro presents a scathing critique of Kamala Harris. He describes her as an empty vessel, lacking authenticity and sincerity. Shapiro argues that Harris's political career has been characterized by opportunism and a failure to connect with the American people. He highlights her inconsistent positions and inability to articulate a coherent vision for the country. Shapiro warns that a Harris presidency would exacerbate the issues facing America, particularly in terms of economic policy and social cohesion. Shapiro discusses the importance of preserving American institutions, arguing that Trump is not a threat to them, as many Democrats claim. He asserts that the institutions of government, including the Supreme Court and Congress, have survived Trump's presidency intact. In contrast, he warns that Harris and the Democratic Party pose a greater threat to these institutions through their calls for court packing and the elimination of the filibuster. Shapiro believes that the left's attempts to undermine the legitimacy of institutions could lead to a breakdown of the social fabric of the nation. The podcast delves into economic policy, with Shapiro praising Trump's approach to taxation and regulation. He argues that Trump's policies fostered an environment conducive to business growth and innovation, contrasting this with Harris's proposed economic agenda, which he views as punitive and detrimental to success. Shapiro emphasizes that Trump's focus on meritocracy and opportunity aligns with the American dream, while Harris's policies reflect a worldview that prioritizes equity over individual achievement. He believes that a return to Trump's economic policies is essential for restoring prosperity in America. Shapiro highlights Trump's foreign policy achievements, arguing that his administration brought stability to global affairs. He contrasts this with the perceived weakness of the Biden-Harris administration, particularly in relation to Russia and China. Shapiro asserts that Trump's approach to foreign policy was characterized by strength and deterrence, which contributed to a more peaceful international landscape. He warns that a Harris presidency would likely lead to a resurgence of global threats, undermining American interests abroad. The podcast addresses the rise of wokeness and its implications for American society. Shapiro argues that Harris embodies the radical left's agenda, which seeks to divide Americans along identity lines. He critiques the left's focus on equity and social justice, asserting that it undermines the principles of individualism and meritocracy. Shapiro believes that a Trump presidency would push back against the encroachment of wokeness in American institutions, preserving the values that have historically defined the nation. As the election approaches, Shapiro analyzes the closing arguments made by both candidates. He critiques Harris's attempts to portray herself as a unifying figure, arguing that her record contradicts her rhetoric. Shapiro highlights the absurdity of her campaign's reliance on celebrity endorsements and superficial messaging. He contrasts this with Trump's straightforward approach, which focuses on addressing the real issues facing Americans. Shapiro believes that voters are looking for authenticity and substance, which he argues Trump provides. Shapiro discusses the role of media in shaping public perception of the candidates. He critiques the legacy media for their bias and misinformation, arguing that they have consistently misrepresented Trump's actions and intentions. Shapiro believes that the media's portrayal of Trump as a threat to democracy is unfounded and serves to distract from the real issues at stake in the election. He emphasizes the importance of seeking out alternative sources of information to gain a clearer understanding of the political landscape. In the concluding segments of the podcast, Shapiro urges listeners to take action and vote. He emphasizes that regardless of personal feelings about Trump, the stakes of the election are too high to remain on the sidelines. Shapiro encourages his audience to engage in the democratic process and make their voices heard. He reiterates his support for Trump, framing it as a necessary choice to protect the future of America. The podcast ends with a call to action, urging listeners to participate in the election and stand up for their beliefs.